that we need to work together to contain this infodemic and to only use information from trusted sources. I want to remind you that EMA will always communicate new information to you without delay, proactively and transparently. Any new recommendation is published through our usual information channels, including our website. I want to use this opportunity to say thank you to those journalists who did not spread the wrong message but touched base with us to check the facts, and to those journalists who helped us to set the record straight. And if the misleading information is still available on any of your websites, please take appropriate action. We all have a responsibility to protect public health. Therefore, many thanks. So let's get started with today's press briefing. I'm delighted to have three colleagues here with me: Mr. Noël Vathion, EMA's Deputy Executive Director, Dr. Marco Cavalieri, the Head of Biological Health Threats and Vaccine Strategy, and Dr. Georgi Genov, the Head of Pharmacovigilance. As usual, your microphone is disabled by default for the duration of the briefing. Initially, Mr. Vathion will provide you with a short update on the latest developments. Then we will have about half an hour for questions and answers. Today's briefing is being broadcast via YouTube and Europe by satellite. The footage can be used free of charge by all media, and you will find the respective links in the invite you received. I'm now handing over to EMA's Deputy Executive Director, Noël Vathion. Mr. Vathion, please.
Thank you very much, Marie-Agnès, and thank you very much for attending today's press briefing, and I will give you an update or a few updates compared to the previous press briefing. They relate to quality-related aspects, also scaling up the production capacity. Thirdly, we will go into safety monitoring, and as a final point, I will mention some updates in relation to the approval process for vaccines. But before going into these different aspects, I would first like to mention the interim results which were announced yesterday by CureVac for their COVID-19 vaccine. As you know, the vaccine is currently undergoing rolling review at the level of the agency. The data which were communicated yesterday by CureVac will be evaluated in the context of this rolling review. Once the final analysis has been performed and the complete data set has been submitted to the agency, only then the agency will be in a position to define the next steps, including clarity on the review timelines. Moving on now to quality-related aspects. Last week we announced that we had to take steps to safeguard the quality of the Janssen's COVID-19 vaccine because of a contamination which occurred at the level of the active substance manufacturing site in the US. Although the contamination didn't occur during the manufacture of the active substance, which was intended for the EU, vaccine batches containing the active substance made at around the same time were not released on the EU market as a precaution and also to safeguard the quality of the vaccines. This concerns approximately 17 million doses of the vaccine. We are doing whatever we can in order to safeguard supplies for EU citizens, including exploring the possibility of using other active substance batches from the emergent site. In addition, the EU will continue to receive vaccines containing the active substance from other manufacturers based in Leiden, the Netherlands, which is currently expanding its manufacturing capacity. Moving on to the second topic, which is scaling up production capacity, is a very important aspect. A recent example is the approval of a new finished product site for Moderna's COVID-19 vaccine in Mans, France. This is expected to further boost the supply of COVID-19 vaccines in the EU. As a third aspect, I would like to highlight to you some aspects in relation to the safety monitoring system, which is working at full speed to pick up any issues. And certainly now that the vaccine rollout gathers pace, with now also younger age groups getting their first dose. As you know, no medicine is 100% safe for everybody, but safety risk can be managed when detected early. This is why we have a strong pharmacovigilance system in place in the EU, and we continue to monitor all vaccines and medicines carefully. This is also why reporting of these adverse events is extremely important. I would also briefly like to run over some of the outcomes of the meeting of our Safety Committee, the PRAC, which met last week. The committee concluded that capillary leak syndrome should be added to the product information as a new side effect of Vaxzevria, and that people who previously had this syndrome must not be vaccinated with the vaccine. Capillary leak syndrome is a very rare and serious condition that causes fluid leakage from small blood vessels, resulting in swelling mainly in the arms and in the legs. Low blood pressure, thickening of the blood, and low blood levels of albumin, which is an important blood protein. The PRAC will continue to monitor for cases of the condition and will take any further action as is considered necessary. The PRAC is also currently analysing concerns with myocarditis and pericarditis that have been reported following vaccination with messenger RNA COVID-19 vaccines. We have been monitoring this issue closely since April, but there is not enough data to establish a causal relationship at this moment in time. It looks, however, like the number of cases is very low and they are mostly mild and resolved within a few days. Some patients were hospitalised but have since recovered. The PRAC is encouraging all healthcare professionals to report any cases of myocarditis or pericarditis and other adverse events in people having these vaccines. Patients who have symptoms such as shortness of breath, a forceful heartbeat that may be irregular, and chest pain following vaccination should immediately consult their doctor. The committee will continue to monitor for cases of the condition and will take any further actions as necessary. Finally, I would like to mention that the PRAC also recommended a change to the product information for Veklury, which is an antiviral medicine used to treat COVID-19, to include sinus bradycardia. This is when the heart beats more slowly than usual, as an adverse reaction of unknown frequency for this medicine. The final point I would like to raise to you today is to give you an update on the approval process for vaccines. You will be aware that EMA has started evaluating an application to extend the use of the COVID-19 vaccine Moderna to include young people aged 12 to 17. The vaccine was already authorized for use in people aged 18 and older in January of this year. Our Committee for Human Medicines, the CHMP, is currently carrying out an accelerated assessment of data submitted in the context of this application, including results from a large ongoing clinical study involving adolescents from 12 to 17 years of age. We will communicate the outcome of this evaluation, which is expected in July, unless, of course, we would need supplementary information to be provided to the agency first before we can reach a conclusion. Mutations of the virus and their impact on the effectiveness of the COVID-19 vaccines is something we are monitoring very carefully. We remain in active discussion with companies and the international partners on adapting vaccines with regards to variants. At the moment, it seems that the vaccines we have authorized protect against all the strains that are dominant in the EU, but of course we need to remain very vigilant. I'd like to wrap up with a brief mention of vaccines that are in the pipeline. So you know we have 4 vaccines under rolling review. CureVac that I already elaborated upon, Novavax, Sinovac, and the Sputnik vaccine. And no marketing authorization applications have yet been submitted for any of these vaccines. For all of these vaccines, the rolling review will continue until there is sufficient evidence for a formal marketing authorization application that can be launched by the companies concerned. So we will finish here now. I thank you very much for your attention, and so that we can take questions.
Many thanks, Mr. Vachon. We will now take questions from the floor, and if you wish to ask a question, please click on the emoticon icon at the bottom of the WebEx window to raise your hand. When I give you the floor, please unmute yourself, and you can then ask your question. The first question comes from Naomi O'Leary from the Irish Times. Naomi, please.
Hello, thank you very much for taking my question. I actually have two quick ones. The first one is on antigen testing. Could you tell me, given that some of these tests have quite a low accuracy rate, is there an appropriate and safe use for them, and what is that? What is your recommendation on that? And then secondly, it's on second doses, particularly of AstraZeneca. There's a large group of EU citizens who have had one dose of AstraZeneca, but because it's quite a long time, typically to get the second dose, there's a lot of people in older groups, over 60s and so on, that are waiting a very long time to get a second shot. Is this concerning given the rise of the Delta variant? And how important is it to speed up to the maximum possible when those second shots might be given? Thank you.
Thanks, Naomi, and both questions can be answered by Dr. Cavalieri.
Yeah, so with respect to the antigen testing, this is not for EMA to comment, as the EMA is not regulating in vitro diagnostics, so it's not possible for us to enter into the details around the performance of this antigen testing, despite, of course, it's a very important point for further consideration from a public health perspective. With respect to your second question about the second dose of Vaxzevria, we have seen some preliminary data in the United Kingdom that indeed would show that this vaccine would be protective against the Delta variant, but also that a second dose would increase the protection quite significantly, and considering that the protection after the first dose is a bit lower than what we see with the Alpha variant that's now circulating in most of Europe. Indeed, it will be important to try to see if the interval between the two doses could be shortened.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cavalieri. We now have a question from Patrizia Antonini from ANSA. Patrizia, please.
Good afternoon. I would like to know whether you have something to say about mixing up vaccines, because, for example, in Italy, we're not keen so much to use AstraZeneca vaccine for the second dose, and I would like to understand whether you have come up with something in your evaluation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Dr. Cavalieri, please.
Yeah, so we are aware of the possibility of using an approach of mixing and matching different vaccines throughout the vaccination campaigns in the member states. And we have to say, and we already stated, that this approach is an approach that has been proven successful in the past in the context of the use of other vaccines, and is well known that mixing and matching vaccine often ends up in a better immune response. Now, we have so far limited evidence with respect to the COVID-19 vaccine about the option of mixing and matching them, but some preliminary studies have shown that indeed the immune response seems to be satisfactory, and no particular issues were emerging from a safety perspective. So it looks like it could be a strategy that could be employed, but of course there is limited evidence, and it's very important that we collect more information and monitor carefully. From an EMA perspective, it's not easy at this stage to come up with any clear-cut recommendation, also because it's unclear whether the marketing authorization holders will be interested into submitting any request for changing the product information.
Thank you very much. The next question comes from Gillian Deutsch from Politico. Gillian, please.
Hi, thanks so much, and thanks for hosting these briefings. I have a few questions. The first is about the CureVac vaccine. Obviously, it posted a 47% efficacy rate. I was wondering, this efficacy rate might increase on the final analysis of the data coming in 2 to 3 weeks. Would the EMA still approve a vaccine with a 50% efficacy rate? I know that was the threshold previously set by regulators. And follow from that's to one of the reasons that CureVac said that they probably had a low efficacy rate is due to the prevalence of variants. I'm curious how concerned we should be that variants will render other vaccines that we're currently using to make them basically ineffective, and if maybe they're more ineffective now than we think.
My last question, though, is for Dr. Cavalieri about this interview with Lastampa. In that interview, the way it's written, which is a Q&A format, it does sound like, Dr. Cavalieri, you were implying that countries should stop using any adenovirus vaccine for people under 60, saying that you would like to see a more cautious approach during the open vaccination days, and that when asked about the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, you said, quote, it remains adenovirus and is preferable to reserve it for over 60s. I was wondering if you could please elaborate on why this interview was incorrect. It is a Q&A. I'm just I genuinely want to understand if it was these quotes were taken really out of context, or these were not the questions that the reporter asked, because otherwise it's quite worrying to have the head of vaccinations at the EMA implying that these vaccines should not be used in under 60s. Thank you.
Thanks, Gillian. Dr. Cavalieri, all three for you.
Yeah, thank you. So the first one about CureVac, I think it's a little bit early to say. We will need to collect all the final data from this clinical trial and have a good analysis of the outcome throughout different regions, different age groups, and according to different variants that were circulating. So I think it's premature to enter into what this means as impact overall of variants on vaccine performance, even if we know that variant could impact somehow the performance of the vaccines, even if so far we have seen that the vaccines that we have approved are holding quite well against the majority of the variants that are circulating right now. With respect to the 50% threshold, we were asking in agreement with the other regulators that the studies are designed in a way that they could prove that the efficacy is at least 50%. But we make clear right from the start that this does not mean that we will not look into the entirety of the evidence. We will consider the benefits and the risks demonstrated by the vaccine and come up with a decision on whether such a vaccine could be approved or not. So, in other words, we will need to look at the data, and only then it will be possible to understand whether what has been proven in terms of efficacy and safety could be sufficient for a marketing authorization. With respect to your second set of questions, I have to say that this has been rather unfortunate and essentially was a misunderstanding on many aspects. With respect to the specific point that you're making on the use of adenoviral vector, the context was the fact that, as you know, cases of thrombosis with thrombocytopenia have been reported. The EMA has looked into them. The Pharmacovigilance Committee, the PRAC, came up with recommendation for both the Janssen vaccine and the AstraZeneca vaccine in this regard. And in the context of Vaxzevria also, we did an additional exercise, which was to put into context this risk with the benefits of this vaccine in a pandemic context and in different levels of viral circulation and based on different age groups. And this has been done because ultimately, and this is the key message that we want to send, is that it's member state decision how they want to use these vaccines in the context of their vaccination campaign. Both these adenoviral vector vaccines are approved and therefore have a positive benefit risk from the age of 18 years old. And therefore it's their decision to decide whether they want to use it in only certain population or not, based on what they have available, what is the current context of the pandemic and the virus circulation, and any other aspect that is inherent to their vaccination campaign. We are still in a pandemic, and it's very important that in this fight against this pandemic we use all the options that we have available, up to member states how to use them in the best interest of public health.
Thank you very much. The next question comes from Annette Birschel from dpa. Annette, please.
Actually, my question was already answered. That was a question about the 50% threshold.
Okay, many thanks.
So if I get that right, there is not a minimum required for approval or examination by the EMA.
Yeah, indeed, I have to say that we always felt difficult to define upfront a threshold, and you see now in this context with variants circulating, it's important to be careful and really analyse and assess all this data before making any conclusion on the benefit risk of the vaccine.
Okay, many thanks. So next is Danny Kemp from AFP. Danny, please.
Hi, thank you very much. Just returning to the point Dr. Cavalieri was talking about before. I mean, understandably, yes, you need a portfolio of vaccines. Yes, we're still in a pandemic. It's important to use all the tools. But, I mean, isn't it probably fair to say that really, looking at the future is going to lie with these mRNA vaccines, really. And secondly, just a very quick one on Sputnik. There was a report the other day that the developers of Sputnik had missed a June 10th deadline for finding some data. Is that correct? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give the first question to Dr. Cavalieri and the second one to Mr. Vertion.
I think with respect to what the future will bring is very difficult to say. We have been very glad to see many different platform technologies brought up very rapidly in order to deliver vaccines that have been already saving thousands and millions of lives. So that has been a crucial step. Whether in the future there will be a certain type of vaccine like the messenger RNA that will remain at the main one or not, or whether other platform technologies like the viral vector one, the subunit vaccine with adjuvanting system, or the whole virulent inactivated one will remain as ancillary vaccine that could play an important role in controlling this coronavirus is difficult to say right now, and we are just glad to have so many options.
Thank you very much. And then on Sputnik, Mr. Vertion.
Yes, thank you. As regards Sputnik, and that's valid for any of the vaccines or therapeutics that are being evaluated in the context of the rolling review or a conditional marketing authorization, we are driven by the moment that the companies provide the answers to the questions that we have asked. So the moment that the company will provide the data that have been requested, we will be continuing our scientific review process, irrespective in the context of the rolling review or the conditional marketing authorization.
Thank you very much. Now we have a question from Marco Bresolin from La Stampa.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes.
Thank you very much. I would like to come back to the issue of the mix of vaccines, because you said that the first evidences are positive, but that EMA is not in the position to give a clear recommendation on that because there is no sufficient data. So I'm wondering, at this stage, what can we say to the citizens? Because they feel like being a sort of test case if there is no enough data on that. And do you think that people under 60 who got the first shot of AstraZeneca should have the possibility, I'm referring to Italy, of course, should have the possibility to decide to get the second dose of the same vaccine and avoid the mix, because in Italy apparently is not the case. There's not the possibility to choice, and they will be obliged to get as a second dose an mRNA vaccines. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Dr. Cavalieri, please.
Yeah, no, that's fully understood. And just to clarify what I said before, that EMA won't be making a clear-cut recommendation because the companies would not be interested so far to submit an application for changing the product information. But I have to say that once we will be collecting more data from the ongoing clinical trials, there are some important studies like the CONCOV study from the UK that will be delivering some crucial data on the immunogenicity very soon. We will consider if behind the normal regulatory procedures that we have, whether we could make any statement with respect to the use of the mix and matching of vaccines. And when it comes to AstraZeneca, just to remind everybody, AstraZeneca is approved in the European Union according to a two-dose schedule. So in principle, it's according to the product information to give a second dose in an interval between 4 and 12 weeks. and therefore, with respect to what would be the preference of the member states, is up to them. It's up to them to decide whether they want to use the vaccine giving 2 doses of Vaxzevria or whether they prefer, for a number of reasons, to give a second dose of a messenger RNA. As said, all the evidence that we have so far is that this is not going to be problematic. But of course, I have to also remind that the level of evidence that we have is limited for the time being, and therefore close monitoring is needed.
Thank you very much. We now have a question from Oda Skjetne from the Norwegian paper VG. Oda, please.
For the Janssen vaccine, how many cases of the unusual blood clots combined with low blood platelets have been reported in the EU or EEA? And could you please provide or include the cutoff date? And secondly, which of the vaccines in rolling review right now is closest to delivering a formal application?
Thank you very much. The first question is going to go to Dr. Genov.
Thank you. On the question of cases with TTS, thrombosis with thrombocytopenia syndrome, with the Janssen vaccine, as of this morning, we have 10 possible cases. This is based on a little over 6 million people being vaccinated with Janssen in the European Economic Area. We're reviewing carefully the cases. These are possible cases. A careful review will determine, as well as follow-up information, if these are true cases of TTS. But at this stage, 10 possible out of 6 million. Over.
Thank you very much. On the rolling reviews, I'm going to give the question to Mr. Vathion.
Well, I think we are being driven by the moment that the companies submit the answers to the questions that we have raised. It may sound all a little bit formalistic, but I mean, we are relying on the data submitted by the pharmaceutical companies. So if you look at this moment in time, we have 4 ongoing rolling reviews. For all of them, we are at this moment waiting for data to be provided. And we are at this moment the end of June, so we'll probably looking into still a number of weeks before we can probably start the next phase, which is a conditional marketing authorization application. So which one will be the first will depend on the timing of the submission of these data and the quality of these data. So we will have to see, and of course we will then communicate.
Thank you very much. We are now going to take the last 2 questions. The first of those is coming from Francien Itema from NOS. Francien. Do you hear us, Francien? Otherwise, let's first take the question from Imana Rachidi from EFE in Spain.
Hi, hello. I would like to know if from the EMA you already established a minimum percentage of vaccinated population to start easing safely the corona measures, like the social distancing and the masks, for example. We are already seeing some European countries thinking to start moving quite to a normal life, and yeah, I'm not sure how really safe is that. I would like to know, the opinion of scientists from the EMA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Imana. Unfortunately, this is not really our remit, but I'm looking here around if someone can provide some comments, but it's really not within the remit of EMA, so it's difficult. You know, we are looking at vaccinations and therapeutics and their efficacy, quality and safety, and not really at the epidemiological situation in countries and the impact of, you know, these kind of measures that were taken by member states. So let's see whether Francien is now on the line. We try again. Francien from NOS.
No.
Now we hear you.
Oh, okay. So I have 2 questions. So the capillary leak syndrome was noted as a side effect for AstraZeneca vaccine. But I also heard that in the Netherlands, someone died after Janssen vaccine and capillary leak syndrome. So I was wondering if you're also investigating this. And next to that, I'm wondering about the numbers for thrombosis and thrombocytopenia for the AstraZeneca vaccine, if you have any updates on that.
Thank you very much. Both questions are for Dr. Genov.
Thank you. Indeed, the changes to the product information, including capillary leak syndrome, as a warning and also as a possibly related to vaccination and a contraindication in patients that had a history of capillary leak syndrome, was based on review of a very small number of cases. We had 14 cases, out of which 6 were of sufficient quality to be able to determine a diagnosis. Indeed, one of those cases was fatal. I will not reveal which country that came from, but and it was a unfortunate case of patient who had a previous history of capillary leak syndrome. So that's on the first point. On the second point, update on AstraZeneca and cases of TTS, thrombosis with thrombocytopenia syndrome. At the previous press briefing, I provided numbers with date log point 20th of May, and I mentioned then 316 cases. I also mentioned that these cases, previously said as well for the Janssen, these potential cases of TTS. So these reports where we have both thrombosis and thrombocytopenia reported. Careful review will determine if these are real TTS cases. Currently, we have 405 cases of TTS, potential cases with AstraZeneca, and this is out of over 45 million people vaccinated. So it remains very rare. The frequency, the reporting frequency remains the same. The trend that I've mentioned previously, a positive trend in terms of reduced mortality, unfortunately some of those events are fatal, is still maintained. So at the last check, we've also seen further reduction in mortality, and that is possibly due to a variety of factors, the awareness, early diagnosis and treatment being a main one, and possibly different population being exposed. So the numbers, I'll just repeat them, 405 possible cases, and this is 45.6 million vaccinated. Thank you.
Many thanks, Dr. Genov. And we are now closing this press briefing. We have exhausted our list of questions. Many thanks for participating today, also to the colleagues here on the panel. If you have any further questions or feedback, please do not hesitate to follow up with our press office at ema@europa.eu. So thank you very much and goodbye.